Parents said I was a disgrace to the family. When I came out, "You're not welcome here," they yelled. I said okay, and that was before my company made national news. They had my life planned down to the letter. Princeton. Then Harvard Law. Marry someone from the Patel family. Take over the real estate business by 30. And raise children in the same house my father grew up in, with the same nameplates on the mailbox and the same smug family portraits in the hallway. But I didn't want their script. Not any of it. I still remember the moment I knew I couldn't live the life they planned. It wasn't dramatic, not like you'd think. No storming out of rooms or screaming matches. It was quiet. I was 15, alone in my room, watching a documentary on early gaming startups. A few kids, literal kids, in a garage making something out of nothing. They were scrappy, broke, laughed at by their families. But they built something. And that feeling, the electricity in my chest? That was the first spark. I started sketching out ideas in notebooks, scribbling mock interfaces, crude game mechanics, notes on user experience and monetization. I taught myself to code in secret. At night, with the sound turned low and my fingers trembling over the keyboard, I built the first prototype of what would later, much later, become the thing that changed everything. But I kept that world separate from the one my parents had made for me. I wore the blazer, joined the clubs, shook hands with their friends' sons and smiled politely when I was told how proud I should be to follow in my father's footsteps. I lived two lives. And for a while, I was good at it. Too good. But secrets don't stay secret forever. Especially not in a family obsessed with image. The cracks started showing, late nights I couldn't explain, classes I started missing. I said I was interning at a hedge fund when I was actually pitching to strangers online, trying to get seed funding with nothing but a scrappy demo and a dream. The first real trouble didn't come from the startup itself. It came from an email. A professor sent my parents a concern note. I hadn't submitted any of my law school applications. I hadn't even asked for recommendation letters. My mother read it over breakfast. I knew because she dropped her spoon halfway through, and her face turned pale as snow. My father didn't speak. He just folded the email, walked into my room, and placed it silently on my desk. Not a word. But that silence? It was louder than any yelling. That was the beginning of the end. You always think the big moments will come with fireworks. But this one came in whispers, sharp, deliberate, behind closed doors. I walked in late one night, headphones still around my neck, laptop tucked under my arm, heart buzzing from a video call with a potential investor. He wasn't a whale, but he was someone who believed in the vision. A small angel investment, just enough to survive another 6 months. I barely had time to step inside before I heard my name. "He's embarrassing us, Raj," my mother's voice hissed. "Everyone's asking where the applications are. What am I supposed to say? That our son is playing video games instead of applying to Harvard?" I stopped in the hallway. My father's voice came next, calm, controlled, and cutting. "We gave him every opportunity. Every connection. And this is what he does with it. He wants to waste his life chasing some pipe dream in that ridiculous industry?" My hands tightened around the laptop. "He's throwing away everything we built," my mother added. "What will the Varmas think? Or the Kumars? You think they'll let their daughter marry into this mess?" I wanted to walk in. To defend myself. But I stood there, spine stiff, heart pounding, listening as my life was reduced to a PR liability. They had no idea I was already incorporated. That I had 3 part-time devs working remotely. That we had traction, real users. That we were building something with teeth. They saw me as a disappointment in a hoodie. That night I didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, thinking about every maybe I'd ever allowed to fester. Maybe I could still go to law school and run the startup on the side. Maybe I could pretend for a little longer. But the next morning, I made my choice. I walked into the dining room with my laptop under my arm and told them everything. "I'm not applying to law school," I said, standing just beyond the reach of their stunned silence. "I've started a company. We just secured our first investment. I'm all in." It took a second for the words to register. Then the eruption came. You what? My mother shouted, her voice cracking like glass. You are not doing this to us. You are not throwing your life away. My father didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. You are a disgrace to this family, he said. If you walk away from everything we've built for you, you're not welcome here. There it was. The strike. I looked at them, not with anger, not even sorrow. Just clarity. Okay, I said. And I walked out. Laptop in hand. No turning back. They thought it was a bluff. The next morning, I think my mother half expected me to slink back in, apologize, agree to some compromise. That I'd realize the weight of what I'd given up. But I didn't come back. I didn't even text. I rented a room in the back of an old duplex 30 minutes outside the city. The walls were thin, the heater rattled like it had bronchitis, and the kitchen sink never drained right. But it was mine. And it was quiet. And in that quiet I built. Those early days were brutal. No health insurance. No sleep. I lived off discount ramen and caffeine pills. The little money I had from the seed investment went straight into paying the dev team and server costs. I coded during the day, took customer support calls at night, and scoured Reddit and Discord to promote our app. We weren't building a game. Not exactly. It was something between a community platform and an e-commerce overlay, a weird hybrid where creators could launch mini storefronts inside their streams. People didn't really get it at first. And neither did investors. Pitch after pitch, rejection after rejection. Too niche. Too early. No clear exit strategy. I heard every polite no you can imagine. And every one felt like sandpaper across an already raw heart. I'd look in the mirror some mornings and not recognize myself. Hollow eyes. Unshaven. 10 pounds lighter. But I'd still boot up the laptop and dive in again. Because for the first time in my life, I was chasing my dream, not theirs. And then came the night I almost quit. It was a Thursday. Rain was hammering against the windows, and the app's backend had crashed during a small streamer's promotion. I'd spent 6 straight hours fixing a bug that turned out to be a one-line typo. When I finally slumped into the couch at 3 a.m., my phone buzzed. It was an email. Subject line: Loved your demo. Let's talk. A venture partner at one of the firms that had ignored me 3 months earlier had tried our platform. His teenage daughter had shown it to him, said, "This is the only thing that actually works without being cringe." He was intrigued. That was the first spark of light. Not the explosion. Not yet. But a signal that I wasn't insane. That maybe, just maybe, this thing had legs. And all I could think, sitting there in the dark with my hoodie soaked in sweat and the room smelling like instant noodles, was, they have no idea what's coming. The meeting was set for Monday. I showed up to the video call wearing the only clean dress shirt I had left, paired with pajama pants. The VC, Greg Rosen, had this calm, analytical tone, like he'd already sized me up before I even clicked join meeting. But to my surprise, he wasn't just curious, he was impressed. "This is clever," he said, leaning back in his chair. "It's not just an overlay, it's a whole new ecosystem. Micro-commerce, live engagement, zero friction. You've built a funnel for the generation that hates being sold to." I wanted to play it cool. Say something smart. But I just nodded like an idiot and said, "Yeah, exactly." He asked a few tough questions about scalability, burn rate, runway. I had the answers. Barely. But I had them. At the end of the call, he said, "We'll send over a term sheet tonight." I stared at the screen long after the Zoom window closed. Mouth slightly open. Heart punching through my chest. That night, I signed the deal. $750,000. Pre-seed. Just like that, we were no longer in survival mode. I hired 2 full-time engineers. Got a real office, a tiny one, but with real chairs and working heat. We started testing aggressively, partnering with small content creators, tweaking every feature based on feedback. And people started talking. First, it was whispers in niche creator circles. Then a few medium-sized Twitch streamers picked us up. Then YouTube channels. TikTok shops. All word of mouth. And suddenly, we weren't a gimmick. We were a solution. The silence from my parents? Still unbroken. No calls. No messages. No check-ins. I wondered sometimes if they were watching. If they saw the articles, the online buzz. If they heard my name mentioned in the same sentence as Next Gen Commerce. If they saw the photo of me, hoodie and all, on the front page of Tech Digest. Part of me hoped they hadn't. Because I knew what was coming next. And I wanted them to feel it. Not with fanfare. Not with revenge speeches. Just with absence. With the weight of being locked out of the thing they once called a joke. We were featured on The Verge 6 weeks later. The headline was clean and punchy. This startup is quietly rewriting how Gen Z buys online. Meet the founder behind the movement. It was surreal, seeing my name in bold next to a quote I barely remembered giving. But what hit me hardest wasn't the article, it was what came after. The messages started flooding in. Old classmates I hadn't spoken to in years. Professors who once marked me uninspired. Exes. Distant cousins. Even a former boss who once told me, "You're too idealistic. That's not how the world works." And then, my uncle. The family's self-declared diplomat. The one who always stayed neutral during fights. "Hey," his message read. "Saw the article. Really proud of you. Your parents, they're just confused. But they love you. Maybe it's time to talk?" I left it on read. Then came the real test. My mother emailed me. Not texted. Emailed, like it was a job application. Subject: Let's talk. Message: Your father and I saw the article. We didn't know you were doing all this. We're proud. Can we meet? Proud. That word, after everything, felt like an insult. Like I was supposed to forget being screamed at across the dinner table, called a disgrace, told I was no longer welcome in the house I grew up in. Now they wanted back in? I closed the email and didn't reply. Not that day. Not the next. 2 days later, I heard from an old family friend, a lawyer who once worked closely with my dad. Apparently, my parents' company, the shining jewel of their reputation, was floundering. Sales had tanked. The younger generation wasn't buying what they were selling. They needed a digital overhaul. A tech upgrade. A miracle. And guess who suddenly looked like a miracle? Me. That same night, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. It was my dad. I let it go to voicemail. When I finally played the message, it was short. Measured. "Call me when you're ready. We could use your expertise." That was it. Not sorry. Not we were wrong. Just a request for help. And something in me clicked. They hadn't just cast me out, they bet against me. Laughed at me. Dismissed me in front of relatives like I was a stain they couldn't scrub out. And now? Now they needed a lifeline. And I had the scissors. 3 weeks later, I walked through the glass doors of their headquarters. I hadn't stepped inside that building since high school, back when I was the future of the family legacy. Now, I was just the rumor turned reality. The kid who left. The prodigal son who never crawled back. They invited me to consult. That was the word they used, consult. As if I'd been on vacation for 5 years and just happened to pick up a few tricks along the way. The meeting was filled with stiff handshakes and forced smiles. Board members who once scolded me for lack of ambition were now nodding too quickly at everything I said. My father, seated at the end of the table, did his best impression of warmth. But behind the rehearsed lines and compliments, I could see it, the panic in his eyes. Their numbers were worse than I thought. Outdated tech, terrible UX, clumsy marketing. They'd missed the shift in consumer behavior entirely. They needed someone who got it. And unfortunately for them, that person was me. I listened. Took notes. Nodded at the right times. But I didn't give them a single real solution in that first meeting. I let them feel hope. I let them taste the idea of rescue. And then, 2 days later, I made an offer. Not a consultation. A purchase. I submitted a proposal through my company's legal team, a full acquisition of their struggling firm, assets, brand name, everything, with the express clause that they'd step down immediately upon the deal's completion. The reaction was swift. My father called me that night, voice sharp with disbelief. "You think you can just walk in here and buy us out?" he snapped. "I think I already have," I replied calmly. "Check the paperwork." "You ungrateful." But I ended the call before he could finish. 3 days later, they accepted. They had no choice. Bankruptcy was weeks away. No bank would loan to them now, and their last client had just dropped a 6-figure contract. My offer was the only parachute in a burning plane. So I bought it. Every desk. Every dusty painting on the wall. Every legacy nameplate. I kept the receptionist. The janitor. The guy in accounting who once gave me a stick of gum when I was 10. The rest? Gone. And then I shut the company down. Publicly. Cleanly. Efficiently. The press release was simple. The firm will be retired and its operations absorbed by a new digital initiative under my leadership. I didn't even mention their names. Just mine. The fallout hit harder than I expected. I didn't announce it with fanfare. No press conference. No gloating. But the industry noticed. Articles popped up like mushrooms after a storm. Rising tech star acquires and dissolves legacy firm in bold industry move. Old guard outpaced by former heir turned founder. When family fails, the startup that swallowed its origin. And just like that, my parents' empire, once the shining example they paraded around the community, was a footnote in my story. At first, I expected rage. Angry calls, dramatic threats, maybe even a lawsuit out of spite. But they didn't say a word. They just went quiet. Then I saw it, a photo someone sent me from a charity gala. My mother standing near the back of the hall, holding a wine glass and smiling for a camera, but her eyes told a different story. My father beside her, thinner now, older somehow. They weren't mingling like they used to. They weren't at the center anymore. They were watching. That was the difference. They used to be the event. Now they were guests, barely. A few days later, I got a package. No note. No return address. Just a manila envelope with a framed photo inside. It was an old picture, me at 10 years old, sitting in the office lobby next to my dad, grinning awkwardly in an oversized blazer. On the back, in my mother's handwriting. "We didn't know what we had." I held it in my hands for a long time. No tears. No warm memories. Just a quiet understanding. They were trying. Too late. Too far gone. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. By the time we hit our Series B, the company was valued at just under $120 million. We'd expanded into 3 new verticals, signed partnerships with some of the biggest content platforms, and opened a second office in Austin. What started as a glitchy prototype in a dim rental room was now the backbone of an emerging market. And the more we grew, the more the world noticed. I was invited to speak at conferences. Asked to mentor younger founders. Featured on podcasts and in profiles with headlines like, "The founder who built an empire from nothing, and burned his bridges along the way." That line always made me laugh. Burned my bridges? No, I just refused to cross them once they'd collapsed under me. Then came the award season. One night I got a call from a former professor at Stanford. He was now chairing a panel for a prestigious tech honor, one I dreamed about back when I was eating ramen and stealing Wi-Fi from the pizza shop downstairs. "You're going to win," he told me. "Off the record, of course. But be ready." When the night came, I walked the carpet in a suit that actually fit this time. My team flanked me, my name flashed on digital walls, and cameras clicked in bursts. A lifetime of pressure, rejection, and doubt distilled into a single polished moment. When they announced my name, I stepped onto the stage. But I didn't thank my parents. I didn't mention family at all. Instead, I looked out into the crowd and said, "Some people will only love the version of you that fits inside their plan. But growth doesn't come from fitting in. It comes from stepping out, even if you do it alone." Afterward, while shaking hands and smiling through congratulations, I noticed two figures toward the back of the room. My parents. They hadn't been invited. I hadn't even known they were in the city. They stood stiffly behind a velvet rope, dressed impeccably but uncertain, like they weren't sure they belonged. And they didn't. Not in this chapter. I met their eyes, just for a moment. My mother gave a faint, hopeful smile. My father nodded once, subtly. I turned and walked away. Because forgiveness isn't a performance. And I wasn't giving them a stage. Months passed. Success stacked on itself like blocks, new hires, new milestones, a user base doubling every quarter. I'd built something resilient. Self-sustaining. The kind of company investors dream about and competitors envy. And yet, sometimes, in the rare quiet moments between flights and launches, I'd wonder. Would they ever actually say it? Not "we're proud of you." Not "we didn't understand." But the words that never came when I needed them most. "We're sorry." I didn't expect groveling. I didn't want tears. Just honesty. An acknowledgement. Something real. But it never came. Instead, they began showing up in the periphery of my world, always just outside the frame. I'd hear they attended events where I spoke but never approached. My mother sent a card for my birthday that simply read, "Hope you're doing well. Love, Mom." She used to sign everything with "all our love." Now it was singular. My father never reached out again. Not directly. But I heard from an old associate that he'd started referring to me as "our son in tech" when trying to impress new contacts. Like I was a bullet point on his resume. That told me everything I needed to know. They didn't want me back because they missed me. They wanted back and because I had value now. Because I had become the exact thing they said I'd never be. So I made a decision. That old family home, the one they tried to pressure me into buying someday, to keep the legacy intact. It went up for sale. Through a shell company, I bought it. Quietly. Then I turned it into something else entirely, a mentorship hub for underrepresented kids interested in startups. I installed gaming PCs in the old den, turned the dining room into a project space. The legacy they clung to? It belonged to someone else now. Kids like me. Kids who didn't fit. And when we hosted our first workshop there, a room full of wide-eyed teens pitching their scrappy ideas over juice boxes and whiteboards, I realized something. I hadn't just rebuilt my life. I'd replaced the foundation they once buried me under. I used to think the greatest victory would be proving them wrong. But now, I understand the real win wasn't the company, or the millions, or the headlines. It was walking away and never needing to come back.